Thank you, Danny. All right, we're just going to jump right in, okay? We only have 25 minutes, right? All right. So, okay, moving along. So I'm going to start off with Jeff. How can organic practices address climate change? How do Organic Valley's practices specifically tackle climate change? And how is soil health part of this equation?
You are going to jump right in.
Yeah.
I love it. All right.
We've got a lot to cover.
All right. Well, at Organic Valley, we're the nation's largest cooperative of organic farmers. And so our practices in our cooperative really abide by organic standards. And so the other thing that we're doing is we're putting a lot of energy into helping our farmers even get better. So in the scheme of things, organic farming is pretty good already, but we want to help them get even better. And so we've pioneered our carbon insetting program, which really is helping to fund projects on farms like solar installations or improved manure management practices, things like that, to help them get even better. And through all those practices, we do see a meaningful benefit to not only the environment around the farm, but also with the soil health overall.
Ron?
Yes.
So how has climate change affected Niman Ranch operations? What support network does Niman have in sharing new knowledge?
Okay, awesome. Before I get started, I was listening to the speakers ahead of us, and I have one thing that I totally disagree with. And actually, it was Danny that said it. Danny, where are you at? But she said that you no longer see frying pans flying across the kitchens. Well, folks, you obviously hadn't been at the dinner table at the Ron Mardesen house and made a comment about something the cook has prepared, because the frying pan still does fly. But that being said, no, that we are in a transition. We're in a time of change, and I think that I am grateful for the way I raise livestock. I raise livestock for Niman Ranch, and I can't describe Ron Mardesen and the way Ron Mardesen farms without bringing Niman Ranch into the picture. I mean, I never embraced the concept of cramming animals into concrete boxes or cramming them into wire cage and calling it humane. I don't care if you call it efficiency. I don't care if you call it productivity. I call it inhumane handling of an animal. I have never been able to embrace that. So my animals and the Niman Ranch animals are raised outside, either on pasture or in deeply bedded pens. Now, that being said, we have avoided the brunt of the controversy over liquid lagoons, liquid manure handling, and things like that. So from an emission standpoint, the farms and the farmers that raise livestock for Niman Ranch are cleaner that way. We do see issues and significance with weather moderations and weather changes because our animals are outside, because we raise our animals that way. We see more extremes in the temperatures. We see more extremes in the water, the rainfalls we get. We see more extremes in the winds and the derechos. I was visiting with somebody before this started, and what Niman Ranch has done in terms of helping its farmers and its network of farmers has been to step up operations and help with deferring some of the costs for damages, help with deferring some of the costs for ramping up operations and programs to prepare, to apprehend, and to bypass or boycott anything that can come and will come that's associated with this. It's not a win-win situation. It's not an easy fix. It's not a blink your eye and it's going to be solved, guys. It took us generations to get to this point, so it's not going to go away overnight. But forward thinking and falling back on each other. I think one of the greatest strengths that farmers have got, and I would add one of the greatest strengths that Niman Ranch farmers have got, is the ability to share ideas, the ability to swap information with each other, and the ability to help each other and lift each other up.
Jeff, is that similar in terms of Organic Valley? Very similar.
Yeah, we really strive to work together as an organization. We believe that there's ongoing learning that's always happening. That's why we spend time at events like this, is while we're really proud of the work we're doing, there's always more we can do and always more we can learn.
So I'm going to switch things over to Lotanna now. You had previously told me that the top 3 issues that young farmers face include access to land capital, market access, and climate change. Can you tell me how young farmers specifically are affected by climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're a group of people who are interested in land and food and ag, and so some of the ways that young farmers particularly are affected by climate change is through unpredictable and extreme weather events. This can really change growing seasons. It can result in destruction of crops. And for young farmers, it's really hard to build back from that because young farmers struggle to access capital and do face really insecure land tenure and land access. If a really big storm wipes out your crops, that could very well mean the end of your farming business, at least in the short term, likely in the long term. And so that's something that we're really seeing with our farmers throughout our network. We, every 5 years, do a big survey of farmers in our network. Our recent survey polled 10,000 young farmers across the United States. And yeah, like I said, land and climate are really rising to the top as issues that young farmers are facing. And as we know, without land, farmers can't farm, they can't implement conservation practices, they can't participate in conservation programs. And so land is truly foundational to the success of young farmers and farmers of all ages. And so that's something that we're really focused on at Young Farmers.
Ron, Niman Ranch's farmers, which span many states, are uniquely in a younger age bracket. I believe the average age of a Niman Ranch farmer is 43, correct? So are they facing the same concerns that Lotanna is talking about?
Okay, I'm a farmer, obviously. One of the most difficult questions I've ever been asked was from a young man about 20 years ago. He says, "Dad, I want to farm. Can I?" I have seen a lifetime of hardships. I've seen a lifetime of struggles, but I've seen a lifetime of successes. I think I told him he'll guess. There's that internal optimism. But the fact that the Niman Ranch farmer is 43 years old says a lot about, first off, the kids that want to do it, but second off, about the company that's supporting them to do it. When Mike and I had that conversation, that's my son, he said, "Dad, I've got the ambition." And he said, "Dad, we've got the ideas. We want to do it. We just need a chance." Man, that hit home. That was hard. That was heavy for me to get my head around. And earlier, we heard the word hope thrown around in a previous conversation. And I would equate chance and hope into the same meaning, at least in this scenario. Because if the young people see a way, can understand a way, and can fathom the concept that they can come home and farm, they're going to do it. There is so much benefit to being your own boss. There's so much benefit to raising your children on the land. And there's so much benefit to doing what you love, what you believe, doing it with integrity, without compromise, and doing it the way you want to. The reason that Niman Ranch's farmers are 43 years old is because we have in place a series of mentors to help beginning farmers. We have in place a series of grants and funding available to help these. We've got regenerative agriculture grants available. We help young farmers get their first set of gilts, which everybody knows are female pigs that have not had babies yet. We help farmers, when they buy a piece of property, to upgrade the facilities so that they can start to farm in those facilities. If you were to become a pork producer in today's society under the CAFO system or commodity agriculture, you would have to go to the bank and sign a note for $1.5 million, that's million, just to put up one building to put your pigs in. Most kids can't do that. I'm 60 years old. I don't want to do that. But the point is, in the Niman Ranch system, or systems like that, you don't have to have those massive investments. 45,000 tops, and you can start and run. You can hit the ground running. It's real, it's doable, and it's achievable if we just give these kids a chance.
Lotanna?
Yeah, if I could just piggyback, I agree with everything you just said. Young people want to farm. So many young people out there want to get into agriculture, but they face so many barriers. And so I think echoing what you just said, having, again, access to capital, being able to qualify for loans to help purchase their first bit of land, having mentors, learning from people who are doing this work already. And yeah, just +1 to all of that. The average age of farmers in the U.S. is nearing 60 years old. And so when the current generation of farmers transitions out of farming, who's going to take up the mantle, right? We're so interested in making sure that there are farmers ready. The next generation of farmers is here and ready to take up the mantle to begin and sustain careers in agriculture, and to do it sustainably, not just environmentally sustainably, but also economically sustainably. So I will just end it there.
Can I just add quickly to that? I think the other thing that we're seeing too is the what is very clear here, but the how can be really complicated, as you said. And it's one thing if you have a family member and you can kind of navigate through some of that, although the laws and estate planning and things can get really complicated. But part of what we're seeing is sometimes there isn't the natural family succession or that kind of thing. And so one of the things we've been really trying to do is play matchmaker and try and find people, young people that want to farm, for people that maybe want to retire, and help them navigate some of the hurdles they have to get through. And, the financial hurdles are big, but we've also seen some creative approaches where maybe over the course of 10 or 15 years, you buy the land first, then you buy the buildings, then you buy the livestock, then you buy the other pieces. And that's been very successful as we've seen it.
All right. So, Curt, in terms of price points, a concern that you raised in one of our previous calls is that school systems cannot afford what Niman and Organic Valley are producing, but they do need access to products produced in these systems. So can you speak to the urgency of figuring out sourcing for schools, which you call the largest restaurants in the country?
Yeah, schools are the largest restaurant chain in the country. There's 7 times more school cafeterias in America than there are McDonald's. And as we think about what are the levers we can and must pull to build a more just and healthful and climate resilient food system, schools are the critical consumer to keep in mind. And schools are reflective of the fact that we've got to figure out how to do climate-friendly ag and food systems at a price point that can work for large populations. There's 5 billion meals a year served at our nation's school meal programs, and figuring out how to get minimally processed, locally grown, and high-quality food grown from regenerative practices into that system is critical to how we actually solve climate change from an ag standpoint at the scale of the problem.
So, as I was speaking to each of our panelists individually, it occurred to me that everyone is working towards similar goals. That said, they seem to be happening in parallel. So how do you guys all work together? How do we figure this out?
It's a good question. I mean, starting from the school standpoint, where we're seeing the greatest inroads really start, are in direct-to-farm relationships between school districts where there's a visionary school nutrition leader who is putting in the time and effort, often with the support and partnership of folks like our FoodCorps team. We have FoodCorps alums in the crowd here, AmeriCorps members who are putting their time and energy into building those relationships and starting to open up the pathways for supply chains to really move at scale. It takes government presence and partnerships to lower some of the barriers and hurdles for that kind of relationship to come into being. And then it starts taking just creative partnerships. Ultimately, the systems we're talking about, the food system or the education system or the piece of the education system and the food system that are bound up together, they're ultimately made up of people. And the key is for people to start establishing those human relationships and begin saying, what could it look like for us to open a supply line between your products and the kids who deserve to be fed nourishing, high-quality meals every single day.
Jeff, Lotanna first, and then I want to hear what ideas Jeff has.
Cool. Yeah. I would say for us, I definitely love the idea of creative partnerships. We're working in coalition with other, food access, climate organizations, other businesses, as well as our farmers, right? Like our farmers are the reason why we at Young Farmers are doing our work. And they are really the ones who are informing the policy decisions that we're making, the policy priorities that I then take to lawmakers and their staff and say, hey, this is what our farmers are saying, this is what they need, this is what you should do to help us achieve this. And so I think it's definitely a multi-pronged approach that takes all of us, right? From farmers to policy advocates to businesses to advocates. And so, yeah, I think, again, that creativity piece, because as this is a huge issue and it's going to take all of us to help solve it.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, it's been both at a local level and at a national level. We've definitely worked with our trade associations to have the conversations in DC about what needs to happen in the school lunch program, and we've actually made some inroads in just the past year. But also at the local level, our consumers are great advocates for what they want for their own kids, and so we've found also a lot of strength at the local level with just consumer advocacy of what they want in the schools as well. So working on kind of both ends of that spectrum has been really helpful.
Ron, any input?
Yeah, I'll reiterate or echo what Jeff just said, but I think that the simple education, an understanding and appreciation of where food comes from, what the farmers can do in terms of interacting with the kids in the schools or the school lunch system, is a plus. The more you know, the more you understand, the more you share common values and clarity with each other is huge. And another thing at the national level, it's been tiptoed around already this morning, but some of the major commodities that we grow are heavily subsidized right now already. It would floor you to find out how much money we throw at those commodities. And if a fraction of that were thrown at this issue, you would be surprised how much better off we'd be. You'd be surprised. I mean, the big four would almost disappear in terms of the diseases that we've got if we would do that.
Can you explain that?
Well, I'm talking about those that are associated with our eating issues. I'm talking diabetes, I'm talking coronary heart disease, I'm talking respiratory issues, and I am talking Alzheimer's. All of those could be significantly hindered or diminished, if not eradicated, with adequate and proper nutrition.
Curt, I'm going to throw things back to you in terms of nutrition.
Yeah. We know the costs that our current approach to farming and eating in this country have for us from an ecological standpoint and from a human standpoint. We've got a reality where every year there's a $1.4 trillion economic cost from the way we eat in this country. And a chunk of that, about 500 billion of it is the direct medical costs of the way we eat. But there's $1 trillion a year of lost economic productivity that comes from shouldering the next generation of people in this country with the realities of being out sick more at school and out sick more at work, progressing less in their careers, advancing less in their educational attainment, ultimately being forced out of the workforce younger. That's a result of the way we feed ourselves in this country. And so a diet that's good for the planet turns out to be a diet that is good for us. And getting kids excited, getting young people, getting the next generation excited about eating fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and alternative sources of protein beyond just meat and dairy. Those are part of what need to be a daily part of a kid's experience in school for them to grow up to be healthy citizens.
You've also told me that the most impact has come from seeing culinary professionals, especially those coming out of larger scale hospitality work, shift careers into leading the school food operations at school districts. Historically, school food leaders have often been accountants or operations professionals, not food people. But having people who are serious about ingredients and flavor and who can apply those skills to feeding thousands of kids on a minimal budget can produce really amazing results. So here's looking at you chefs in the room. A huge part of sustainable food is making sure that the food produced is delicious so that it doesn't go to waste. And you're all in a room full of chefs and people who represent the restaurant industry. How would each of you like to encourage them to craft climate-conscious menus, make changes in their daily work? What would you like to tell them? And this is for everybody. Who would like to start?
I'll start with a plug for chefs in the room and joining us on the live stream to get involved in your local school system, not from a place of believing you come in with all the answers and telling people what to do, from a place of curiosity. Bring your resources to the table and come with questions and curiosity and ask the question of, are there ways I can help? Because we're trying to take this giant system, 100,000 school cafeterias in this country, serving 50 million kids, trying to take that system and begin thinking about it in a fundamentally different way and asking, what can we learn from flavor and from sourcing and from culinary practice that we can bring alive for kids in a way that honors their cultures, lifts up what they eat at home and at their grandparents' house, and reflects the diversity of our food system in local places around the country. That's work chefs are uniquely great at. Please bring that energy and creativity and spirit to our nation's schools.
Yeah, I think for me, support your local young farmer. They are in your neighborhoods, they are in your states, your cities, your regions. And I think that is something that's super important, because in order to create a more sustainable food system, it needs to start with local food system resilience, like supporting local food sheds, buying local, again, supporting this next generation of farmers. Young farmers really struggle to access markets, and so by connecting with the young farmers in your area, I think that's a great way to, support farmers that are doing really cool work and farming in really sustainable and innovative ways.
And I think I agree with everything you both have said. I would add that I think chefs have a really great opportunity to engage more with schools directly, because I think the education of kids that are at young ages is really important. They don't really think, like we were all kids once, right? We didn't really think about what we were eating in those days. But I think if we teach them more about it, I think they will start thinking more about it. And I think, sometimes if maybe you're in an urban setting, it's harder to engage with your local farmer, although I encourage it 100%. But then I think that's where the role of the chef can be even more important and impactful, is just really trying to educate at a young age of why it matters and what you're putting in your body.
I'll build off of that. I mean, who in this room when they were little didn't like getting their hands dirty? Who didn't like get your fingernails dirty, And I think little people are the same now as they were then. I mean, I think it's instrumental that we not only tell them where their food comes from, but we show them where it comes from, and we let them get dirty seeing how it's produced. I think that's huge, because once you've done it, once you've got a little sweat equity into it, you have a whole different idea about sliding that salad off and putting it in the trash can so nobody can see it. And one more thing. I have touted for years, it always amazes me, how a chef can take one of my pigs and turn it into magic. But that being said, you're all talented, you're all gifted, but at the end of the day, let the food source flavor come through on its own. I mean, you do a phenomenal job of making it better, but don't do such a phenomenal job that you don't recognize what it was.
So I'm a former chef, or I'm trying to be a former chef. I'm easing my way out of chefing. I used to have a restaurant, so I'm very familiar with issues in sourcing and wrestling between like choosing the cheapest product, so that that affects my bottom line. Like, I feel all rosy and hopeful at this point, but I know that we all face these challenges of trying to make this entire system work. So I'm also curious, like, what are the biggest challenges that you see in your corner of the world, your corner of the food system, starting with Curt?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge is, how do we galvanize public momentum, a real movement to push for the policy change that needs to be in place? School meals should be free for every single child. There should not be an income test where kids have to pay money at the lunch line but not to get on the school bus. Additionally, we need to give school districts the resources they need to upgrade their infrastructure. When the National School Lunch Program went into effect in the 1940s, most school buildings were already built. And so schools in this country don't have adequate kitchen facilities. Give them the money they need to put in the induction stove, to move out the warmer oven, get set up to cook high-quality meals from scratch. And we need to support the kind of infrastructure for food education to happen, so kids can get out, get their hands in the dirt, learn how to cook. That looks like school garden infrastructure, food educator positions, teaching kitchens for schools that are ready for that. So to me, it is a policy investment that needs to come next in our country, and that really is going to take all of us to make school food, feeding kids, and a more just and healthful and regenerative food system a priority that rises to level of state and national importance.
Yeah, I think in my small corner of the world, definitely the policy change is hugely important. like we know, this next election is can be very consequential, but at the same time, we're in the middle of the process of creating a new farm bill, and this is really our last best chance to get really significant investments in equitable land transition for farmers, climate action, making it easier for farmers, especially young farmers, to implement conservation programs and practices on their farms, breaking down some of the barriers that I've talked about. And so I think for me, really just continuing to advocate for our policy priorities. Young Farmers is working on a few marker bills that we're hoping to be included in the Farm Bill that will directly address some of the issues that I've mentioned here.
We have actually a couple more minutes now. Do you want to tell me about those?
Sure. So we're working on 3 bills primarily. The first one is called the Land Access, Security, and Opportunities Act. This is a bipartisan bill, and basically its function is to facilitate land transition, making it easier for young farmers to access land, really supporting resilient food sheds, and helping farmers access markets, access capital, all the things I've been talking about today. The second bill that we're working on is the Farmer to Farmer Education Act, also a bipartisan bill. And this bill really, what it does is it supports farmer-led education through research that we've done and through conversations with our farmers and through our work. We have found that farmers are learning best from other farmers. They're not going to USDA necessarily for information about farming or best practices or conservation practices. It's really going to other farmers, or they're going to other farmers. And these farmer mentors are often doing this work unpaid. And so this is a way to support farmers for the work that they're already doing. And really, again, just build this mentorship, build these farmer networks, build these resilient local food systems. And then the final bill that we're working on is the Small Farm Conservation Act. And this bill basically creates a scaled down version of the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which is the most popular USDA conservation program that our farmers use, despite facing many barriers to using this program. And so this basically makes it so that small farmers and young farmers are competing only against each other when submitting applications to this program, because as it stands right now, they're competing against much larger operations, which makes them less competitive and less likely to receive funding and programming. And so this just, is a scaled down version of that program to just make it really easy for these farmers to access this conservation money. So these 3 bills are truly what I live and breathe. I am talking to lawmakers and their staff all the time, really pushing for our policy priorities, and really hoping to see these in the next Farm Bill.
All right. Yes, absolutely. I think back to your question on how we can work together in the movement and really galvanize with one another. I think, tying even back to your previous question around the food service industry, I think the origin story of food used to be way more tied to like the white tablecloth segment. But I think increasingly we're seeing quick serve restaurants or fast casual restaurants start to tell the story really well. And we know that food service tends to be a precursor of consumer behavior. So I think continuing down that path is going to be really important because people do pay attention to those things. And then I think we do have a tailwind that is growing that we didn't always have, which is consumers are caring more and more about where their food comes from. And the more we talk to each other about that, the more we make it a topic at the table, I think is going to be really important for all of us.
Thank you. I would add, we've left out one group here when we've talked about school lunch programs and stuff. I come from a town of 392 people. Proud of it, by the way. I know everybody. But that being said, the little people aren't the only ones that we need to worry about from a nutrition standpoint. We don't want to forget the folks that are a little bit older, that maybe their money's a little bit tighter. We need to address the issue of everybody who needs that nutrition program. The inner core of the Midwest and the inner core of rural America is eroding. It's hollow. It's a shell of what it was. When I was a young man, I could have stood up here with 10 of my best friends and we would talk about how optimistic we were and how bright-eyed we were about becoming farmers. Well, here I am a few years later, and I would be the only one left. That's how many farmers have left the Midwest. They've gone on because they either couldn't do it or the markets were gone. In my lifetime, I have seen and I have heard one agricultural department after another say, get big or get out. It's all about efficiency. We don't worry about the environmental hazards. We don't worry about the welfare of the animals. We don't care about the individual family farmer. That needs to stop. That needs to change. Because guess what? Because every farmer we keep on the land, we have a reason for a gas station to stay open in town. We have a reason for a school to stay open in town. We have a reason for a church to stay open in town. We have a reason for the Midwest to become what it was once. We need that. You were talking about the Farm Bill. Now is the time to hammer that down. I'm personally very passionate about the EATS Act, which is still up in the air within the Farm Bill. And the EATS is the Eliminating Agricultural Trade Suppression, which is nothing more than a glorified way for the National Pork Producers and the Farm Bureau to try to get Proposition 12 off the books. Proposition 12 was a law that was passed in California by a majority of the voters that said that mama pig should not be crammed in a cage 2 foot by 7 foot long for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. They said it's not humane, and we're not going to buy pork from folks that think it is. So don't be afraid to stand up. Don't be afraid to support people like that. And don't be afraid to let your congressmen or your senators know exactly what you think about this Farm Bill.
Or your congresswoman.
Sorry.
All right. That wraps things up for today, at least for us. Not for the rest of the day, I'm sorry. I misspoke.